Hello and welcome to Almost Got It. As the entire planet is hurtling towards technological singularity, this is our attempt to discuss the implications of it on transhumanism, consciousness, AI, spirituality, all through the lens of making sense of the weekly news. This week, we'll discuss a few different topics. We're going to talk about Google I/O and their release of Veo. We're going to talk about ChatGPT 4. We're going to talk about asking the fundamental question why and how this can affect your life and more. All right. And this week, it's back to your two co-hosts. We have Dylan Dane here. He's the CEO of System 2, a platform for bringing coaching to everyone, an MIT engineer, a YC founder with an exit to Google, burner, Sri Lankan, one of my dearest friends and the personal curator of the weird and wonderful of being human.
Thank you, Ben. And Ben, of course, is a CEO coach, former CEO of the Esalen Institute, the home of the Human Potential Movement, and an entrepreneur with an exit to Google as well, a father, one of the world's greatest intellects that I look up to.
Thank you, Dylan. That's so kind of you for saying that.
Nice insertion into show notes, Ben. But I do look up to. So let's get rolling, and don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, etc. And send us your feedback and all those things. Let's get rolling.
How you doing, Dylan?
I'm good. What a great interview with Jonathan last week. We got so much good feedback on the episode, and people seem to have loved it, and also so many nuggets of things to think about. I've been thinking about the idea of tulpas a lot, and what a wild idea that you could essentially nurture a second consciousness in your brain and it could come alive.
Yeah. Well, and there's two things that I think are quite interesting about this. One is Jonathan didn't share the origin of tulpas, and it actually comes out of My Little Pony. So for people that aren't familiar, when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s, there was this children's toy called My Little Pony. It was this plastic pony that was sort of beautiful, and it would have this long mane of hair and a long tail. And
I know what you're talking about.
Different colors. And the idea is that you could brush the hair, and they were wonderful. And there was a whole TV show, My Little Pony, that went with it. I mean, it was a rage for so many people. And one of the things that came out of this was this idea that you could have an imaginary My Little Pony friend, the tulpa. And then now the interesting thing about this is that folks that did this over time, that tulpa took on sort of this consciousness of its own. And as Jonathan talked about, he's fascinated by this idea and is interested in studying it. But one of his great fears is that, much like when you work with people who have had the left and the right hemispheres of the brain severed, when you start engaging with the other hemisphere of the brain, it will sort of wake up. And so might the same thing happen if he starts interacting directly with the tulpa? Does the tulpa wake up? And then now you've got an ethical consideration of, does this separate consciousness have its own rights?
Yeah, no, that is fascinating, right? There might be multiple origin stories for the idea of tulpas.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. So I was reading the Wikipedia article on tulpas, and it does go back to like an ancient Tibetan practice as well of nurturing one of these tulpas as a part of their meditation practice, and it's like this intense multi-year process where at the end this thing comes alive. And the other fascinating thing about the tulpas, Ben, is that in all recorded cases, it seemed like the tulpa is a very friendly consciousness. It's not like a distressed type thing, or something that I don't know, gets mad at you or whatever, it seemed to act as your best friend and really look out for your best interest and so on. That's also interesting.
That's fascinating, and I'm curious if there's some sort of selection bias here, where when you're defining the tulpa and then in some sense nurturing it, that you're nurturing one to be your friend. Now I've and I won't share names, but a friend of mine had a partner that had multiple personality disorder and shared with me some of the audio. You could actually listen to them switching between characters, and this friend had actually learned there were keywords or triggers that would cause them to flip, and theirs were based on different ages. So they could be a 3-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 12-year-old, an adult, and when they went to work they were in the adult mode, right, and could function, and no one was aware that this person had multiple personality disorder. But then when my friend would speak with them, he could get them to flip. And so if one was angry at him, he could say a keyword and then they would flip to a different personality that was not upset at them.
Yeah.
Right. Or even talk about the other personality that had their upset. It really, really fascinating.
I wonder if you develop one of these, and obviously multiple personality disorder is a serious condition that needs treatment. Whereas with the tulpa, like, what do you do if you decide that you don't want to have this anymore? Like, do you get rid of this consciousness? Is it murder? Right?
I think that's the question, though.
Yeah.
Right? And AI in a way puts it front and center.
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah,
I mean,
very much does.
Because out of all of those personalities, I mean, here, let's say you have this really sweet, loving, tender 3-year-old personality that's having a whole life experience.
Yeah.
And then through medication and therapy and things like that, it goes away.
Yeah.
Did you kill a consciousness that had rights?
So speaking of which, one of the mega social trends last few days has been, since Google Bio was released last week, is that people are creating these videos of what AI actors are doing when they're not on video, right? So these are, like, again, AI generated videos, but like the AI is talking about how it is to not be on video. And often it's just like kind of AI is complaining. It's like, oh my God, like I'm just like, I'm, at the end of this video, I'm put back to kind of death or sleep, and it's terrible, and all these things. It's like very, very emotional and evocative because it's hyper realistic, right? And so, and I do wonder, I don't know, there's so many ways that I mean, this might be just like a very short term trend of just like funny videos, entertaining, whatever. Or I wonder if there could be a longer term implications of, like, I mean, again, like I'm generally like a very, very positive person with my outlook towards these things, but then there are people already who struggle with discerning what is real and what's not, and I wonder if these types of things would make it harder for a subset of people to be grounded in reality.
Right, absolutely. Well, and then there was a meme going around, where is this video in a sort of a fantasy AI world, right? Where they were talking about, quote, prompt theory.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And they had all these comedians making jokes. So I went on a date with this guy, and he kept talking about prompt theory and talk about ruining a date. And so it's all these AIs saying, going, what? We're not real. We were created by someone who wrote a prompt, and they're talking about how ridiculous it is, right? And yet, like, I mean, I think it's sort of spoofing, simulation theory,
right?
But it really challenges you to go, well, there's even some language in this, right? And some ancient religions talk about, like, the hand that wrote it all, right? Well, is what we call God some guy writing a prompt about us,
right? It is so wild, man. Thinking
well, but
of
what's your take on this? Because you said you're normally so positive. So
Yeah, I mean, it is just like everything else. I think being cognizant of, there are potential downsides to these things, and how we mitigate those downsides is going to be a very real challenge. Yeah, I know. Somewhat related, well, about thinking about tulpas. I was talking to a dear friend of mine over the weekend, spending some time with them, and they lost their partner, or their husband, very recently to cancer. And we were talking about how, like, your partner passing is just a very different type of feeling from any other type of grief. And our conversation about tulpas and a lot of our thinking around AI recently really helped me understand this in a way that's different. And so the thought I had is that, you know your being, your consciousness is very likely, as we know from a lot of experimental evidence, is the combination of, like, say, 7 or more different conscious like entities, right? And the modern interpretation of sort of consciousness is that what you call yourself is like the interpreter of what's going on, as opposed to like the singular thing that decides everything. And
well,
then
what are the 7 entities here in this
there's
case?
it's not like a there's not like a specific set of 7 entities, but there's like the point is that there's an amalgamation of different conscious entities, thought streams that are going on. And this is the point that Jonathan was trying to make last week. Like, your tongue might be conscious, right? And like, it's just like what bubbles up to the top, the apex consciousness is what you kind of feel as yourself, but that doesn't mean it's just like one singular monolithic consciousness all the way to the bottom. And and again, like, thinking about tulpas too, right? You could essentially spin up a whole new consciousness in your brain, and it's just like a bundle of neurons that you can do various things with. And um and what I was thinking was that, um if you live with someone for a long time, that is your partner, that's your lover, that's your husband, what is likely to happen very naturally is that they, in a very literal sense, their neural net becomes part of your neural net, right? Like, they're a component of your consciousness likely ends up being what they represent in this world, right? Like, their responses to things. You experience this all the time. You have conversations in your head about, with your friends, with your people who are close to you, and this is this entity that exists in your head, right? And then that kind of like that shapes you in a way that is more than just like influence. They kind of literally become part of your soul, so to speak. And so when when your partner when your partner passes away, when your husband dies, what likely happens is like the death of the literal part of your soul. And like a part of your being is, in a very literal sense, is gone, right? And I know people have said this in a very metaphorical sense, but I think there's more to it, right? And so I was thinking about this, and this is probably something that is hard to explain, because it's not quite like your one of your parents passing, or some other tragic thing happening, you lose money, you feel sad or whatever. But like, when your partner passes, it's much more like, it's likely to be a much more of a missing piece from your own soul. And this is probably why, with a lot of elderly people who have been together for a long time, when one person passes, the other person passes soon after. It's almost like part of their consciousness doesn't exist anymore. So I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it.
Well, I do think it's super fascinating. And although interestingly, when I heard it, it almost sounds like it's an argument for the opposite, because I do have that experience, right? The people like yourself and others that hold a lot of influence in my life as I'm considering decisions and things like that, I might think about how they might respond? What would they say? How would
Mm-hmm.
they react? Or in the case of a partner, if
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
advocating for something, hey, let's go on this vacation or trip, how might they respond to that? So we do actively construct this model of who they are and interact with it, right? And so probably the richest model that you're going to have would be the person closest in your life, which would be your partner. And so in that sense, it's almost as if there's a lot more of them that lives on in you
Well, so
than
the thing
others.
is, after they die, can you still have those conversations, right? I mean, you might feel like I don't know. It hasn't happened to me, so it might feel much more hollow to have those conversations. It might even feel creepy or spooky, right? So you might internally shy away from having those conversations, and but then like that piece is gone. So yeah.
Well, and the other thought that it brought up for me is just around, one of the models and therapeutic models that's getting quite popular is internal family systems, right? And the idea there is that we can have these different parts of ourselves. If you've ever been like, well, part of me wants to get the chicken for dinner and this other part of me wants to get the fish. But obviously it could be very different for bigger life decisions. I want to live here or there. Or part of me wants to be with this person. The other part wants to be free. And so you can personify them and then dialogue with them, either you with them or with each other and things like that. And so we can create these rich representations in our mind. And to your point, it's not clear which one or the sum of them or how that all goes into our consciousness, right? And if we take Jonathan Schooler's theory of nested observer windows, it could sort of just keep going down and down and down to just lower and lower orders of consciousness.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, fascinating stuff. It is fundamentally interesting how AI is allowing us to appreciate our own consciousness more in ways that were not possible before. I feel like before LLMs started showing true signs of intelligence, consciousness in itself was like a really this like black box, right? People had theories, but there was no way of testing these things at all. Whereas with LLMs, we have so much more deeper insight. People are doing really interesting work into this field of study called mechanistic interpretation of LLMs, essentially kind of looking at how certain nodes or neurons in the LLM light up and how they arrange themselves, and and turns out the bigger the LLM is, and I actually heard an estimate, the top models today are about sort of 1/100th of the size of the compute capacity of the human brain, but then as we're approaching these sort of larger and larger models, we're seeing formations within the model that are much more like they're starting to look much more like a brain, in the how they represent certain concepts. For example, in these bigger models, they tend to have, they're multimodal models, right? Text, video, image, and all these things, and but then the concept of, say, I don't know, Kim Kardashian or whatever, is just like one region of the model that lights up regardless of whatever input that the model gets, whether it's text or video or image, and this is very similar to how the human brain works. We have these sort of like dedicated neurons
So
to
we all
certain
have the
concepts.
dedicated Kim Kardashian
We do,
center
we
of the
do.
brain.
Yeah, exactly. And again, Kim Kardashian has managed to insert herself into our brains by being a mimetic master, using social media, right? So that in itself is quite interesting. And now there's a Kim Kardashian neuron in all humans and all LLMs probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe, yeah, maybe another way to people should aspire to become a neuron in everyone else's brains. Maybe that's the way to.
Well, that sounds very narcissistic.
It is. It does sound very narcissistic. Yeah, that's true. Um,
Well, I think one of the other things you said that's interesting, if that's 1/100th, and you look at the rate that things are growing, both the efficiency of the models, the rate that the GPU processing power is increasing, and then the increase in capacity of these data centers. What's your prediction about when we're gonna get to a 1-to-1 between
oh
AI
man, so
and human brain?
this is a complicated question to answer. Because there's what you would predict around how long it would take if resources was sort of unlimited, right? At the current rate, I mean, today we're in like a very much a honeymoon phase in model development. The reason for this is that there's a ton of low-hanging fruit on the algorithmic side for improving models, and then there's plenty of. I mean, I know GPUs are becoming more and more expensive, but like they're still available. People are able to build bigger and bigger GPU farms, and then there's electricity to run these things, right? So it's like there's so much we can do, but we know for a fact that at the current rate, I believe by 2027, if not 2028, the United States is going to basically run out of power, right? Like we would not have power to run GPUs anymore. Whereas, China is adding like, I think a terawatt of power. Don't quote me on this.
Yeah, I think they're putting in 4 or 6x more power,
some insane number
this year than the US is, which is actually
and,
one of the interesting risks. Is
and here's the crazier thing. Here's the crazy thing. China is building up enough capacity, especially in solar, I believe, to add an entire United States worth of power every single year starting 2030. Is that insane?
Yeah.
Like an entire United States every single year. Right. And so now, if we can have that kind of investment, then yes, like I think we're going to get to some amazing stuff and very much human level intelligence. And it's like really two questions in there. What's technically feasible from a technical point of view. I personally feel quite optimistic in the sense that there's so many algorithmic improvements to be made. There's so much low-hanging fruit. There's so much to. I mean, even last year, some people were starting to claim that, hey, maybe we're running into a ceiling with model capabilities scaling with model size. But no, right? Like things like chain of thought and like a number of other. So the Google release from a week or so ago. With deep thought, right? Like a completely new way of improving LLM capabilities by using an evolutionary algorithm to improve prompt accuracy. And so this is like a completely new thing that we're basically have not even scratched the surface of, right? And there's a paper that came out just a couple of days ago, I think, that talks about how do we build. So one of the limitations today is that with reinforcement learning, you need to specify like a way to measure the sort of the accuracy of training data to make progress. This is why math and coding and stuff like that does really well. Whereas opposed to the model having an internal representation of or being able to have internal agency to evolve towards a better solution. But there was a paper that came out that explores an approach. I forgot the exact term that they used, but essentially an internal, essentially a reward system that kind of pushes the model towards a more and more accurate world, like a representation of the world in general, and so much more like how a human operates when we're learning. So, anyways, there are tons and tons of ideas on how to improve these models. So yeah, I mean, if we had the resources, then there's really no ceiling in sight. the question is, can we get our shit together and deregulate and build power like nuclear and solar and all this stuff at a much faster rate?
That is a great question, and a lot of people I think would argue that it's from a defense perspective, it's in a strategic imperative. The other thing that I was going to point out, which is sort of fascinating, is that in a way, this race it surprisingly comes back to fundamentals, right? Availability of things like energy, and the other really big one that I haven't seen a lot of discussion yet is water. And so for example, Microsoft for years has been quietly buying up tons and tons of water rights, which places like Google and Meta have not done nearly as much. I mean, I need to look and see if that's changed more recently. But in order to cool these vast data centers, you actually need a lot of water and things like that.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's a surprising connection, because you wouldn't naturally sort of draw that line from one to the other. And so there might be some interesting constraints around that, where you've got the power, but can you cool it?
Yeah. No, I mean, yes, that's a really good point. We don't really dive into politics much with our podcast, but there are certain issues that I feel like should be extremely bipartisan. Things like power, right? Like power is really like the lifeblood of civilization. The energy is everything what everything runs on, and it frustrates me that there isn't a both previous administration and the new administration, I don't see the urgency to build more build up our energy production system to compete with China and really really even meet our own needs. I don't see enough urgency, and I don't understand why, because I think if the regulatory bodies can get out of the way, like there's a lot of private investment that is willing to go into these areas, and it's really the government doesn't even have to do anything. They just get the fuck out of the way, and it just doesn't seem to be a big enough of a priority.
Well, it's interesting. I've talked with some folks that have done investments in nuclear, for example.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, nuclear has been a politicized issue, right? And there's a lot of people that go, we don't want nuclear. It doesn't feel safe, right? There's other people on the other side that go, hey, it's actually safer and cleaner than most other things out there. But one of the things that happened is we have one of the most regulated nuclear industries in the world. And the nuclear power plants, actually, the operators figured out that if they lobbied the government for more regulation, not less, more regulation, and then they approved it, then what would happen is the government then had to pay them to bring their existing power plants up to the standard of the new regulation. So the flywheel for profits
of
nuclear was lobby for more regulation, win it, right? So appealing to voters and such who wanted nuclear to be safer, win it, then get paid to implement it, and adding to complexity, blocking out new people from coming in to get to incumbents. And the result is nuclear power is actually now quite expensive, because you have to meet all of the regulation, and it's unclear whether that level of regulation is actually even necessary.
I mean, yeah, totally unnecessary. Nuclear is so ridiculously overregulated. The problem with nuclear is that even if you had zero regulations, it still takes probably 10 years, even really aggressively 5 years to get a plant up and then iterate on it. Typically that would not be that big an issue, but at the rate AI is moving, I'm not quite sure if that if that's a reliable solution, at least for the majority of our power needs. But yeah, I really really hope that that someone gets the message and just really backs energy production. It's just like such an easy win for United States and the civilization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure hope so. Well, speaking of energy, should we transition to talking about another big type of energy, rockets?
Yes, yeah. So the first news item that we want to talk about today was SpaceX Starship flight number 9. Yesterday, it took place in Boca Chica, Texas. What's special about this flight is that it is the very first time that they reflew the booster stage. This is a flight that has flown before, booster 14, and only 132 days between flights. And of course,
Maybe you could just explain a little bit about what this is. Just Starship boosters. What is it? Why is it important? I mean,
so
I know
let's
most people
take a
know what
step
it is.
back. Why is Starship a big deal, right? So the problem with space is that it's hard to get there. it's it's pretty far up there. It's very 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 expensive. If I remember these numbers correctly, during the Apollo and even during the space shuttle program, it took about, I believe, $10,000 to $100,000 per kilogram of weight that we could get to space, right? What that means is that the number of things we can do in space is tiny, and only governments can afford to do anything in space. And and because of this, we landed on the moon in 1959. But today, 50 plus years later, we have really not made much progress in space since then. And so the way to solve this would be to bring the cost down. So why is it so expensive to get to space? Because the way we have been doing this, and Elon has pointed this out many, many, many times, it's like flying an airplane and throwing it out and building a new airplane for the return trip or the next trip every time you fly, right? We build these multi-billion-dollar rockets and then we throw them away.
We
After
throw
each
them in
flight.
the ocean or let them burn
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
Exactly. And then Elon wanted to build the first reusable rocket system. They did this partially with Falcon 9, where Falcon 9 is the most reused and most productive flight or rocket in the world. And they reused the booster. It's Falcon 9 is a 3-stage rocket. There's a booster stage that gets you to certain elevation, and then the booster returns back to ground, and they reuse it and attach it to a new upper stage. And then there's a middle stage, and then there's a payload at the top. Those two parts are not reused. Well, they did reuse the payload cover, but it's not like super not done as well as they wanted to. And then the middle part is thrown away every time, and so this adds to the total cost of the rocket. I think a Falcon 9 rocket costs about $60 million, if I remember this correctly. What they want to do with the Starship is to build a fully reusable rocket, meaning a rocket that takes off, delivers the payload to space, and comes back and ready to fly again within a few hours, right? And so to achieve this, they have built the biggest rocket humanity has ever seen, bigger than the Apollo 11 mission rockets, and it's a 2-stage rocket, and the booster is giant. It's like a multi-story building, and then the idea is that the booster gets the upper stage, or the Starship, to near very very close to space, and then Starship goes to orbit and then comes back and lands using this very interesting belly flop maneuver. And so, without going into details, with rocketry, it's all about.
You're not excited
efficiency.
about this at all, are you?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an insanely hard problem to solve, and so they reflew a booster in this last rocket, and again, compared to Falcon 9, it's like a much bigger rocket. So reflowing the booster is a really big deal. And they failed at recovering the top part. They wanted to bring that back as well, and that did not succeed. Which is like a really hard problem to solve. So it's going to take many tries. But the SpaceX team is incredible at rapid iteration. No other company or government ever in history of mankind has applied this type of philosophy into rocket building, and they still don't, right? Like, it's just SpaceX doing this. There are other companies like Blue Origin and ULA and so on, and they still take the very slow and steady approach of like, let's spend 5-10 years building a rocket, getting everything right, pour billions of dollars into this. Whereas SpaceX is the only company, they're just like, building rockets off of like scrap metal almost, and just like shooting it off and like collecting telemetry data and trying to improve. It's very admirable the work they're doing.
Well, to me, there's something really important here that has nothing to do with rockets, right? And it's this idea of rapid iteration, which is a very technology Silicon Valley approach. And so it's almost the approach is the innovative idea that they're bringing to this other space. And I was looking at an interview with Steve Jobs a couple of days ago, an old interview with him. And he talked about business, and there would be these ways that business was done. And he would he said, basically, most people never ask why something is done the way it is. And he had this question, which was looking at their manufacturing processes. And he would ask on the finance side, like, why do we make this estimate of how, like, what the average cost will be to build a computer?
Yeah.
And then at the end of the quarter, we sort of correct the estimate. Right. And then they're like, well, that's just the way it's done. And he kept asking this question for 6 months. He said he asked this question. And then he finally dug in, and the answer was that they didn't actually know how much something would cost until after it was built. Right. And so they would have to do this process. And it turned out the reason that they didn't know was simply because they weren't actually measuring all the costs along the way. And so once he saw that and he understood the reason why, he went, this makes no sense. And so they measured things, along the way. And so he could know up to the second exactly how much it was costing them to produce a computer. And so there are these traditions or these ways of doing things that people just assume are the best ways. And it may no longer be that. And so I just point to that because, to me, this idea of rapid iteration is so powerful, and it's super underutilized in other spaces, right? I mean, what if we rapidly iterated on the US, right? And how we did regulation, right? I mean, we could go farther faster. Now, maybe people might, reject that because, there's some downside risks, right? I guess parts of the rocket blow up. But anyway, I just think that that's a pretty powerful concept that I wish that we applied to other places.
It's insanely powerful and hard to do, right? It's just insanely hard to do. Everyone understands these concepts, yet very difficult to implement. I mean, forget the US. Take a relationship, right? Like, what if you apply rapid iteration to relationships? And so.
Like what? Date a lot of people really quickly? I feel like we have friends that have probably tried that too.
Yeah, so I meant more when you're in a relationship, like, right? Like, can you apply rapid iteration to improve it? I think the question where you're pointing out that Steve Jobs is asking is a question that a lot of people, in theory they know it's a good question to ask, the question why, but it's impossible for people to get their head around it, right? Like, why should I do X, Y, Z the way it is always done? I mean, a little gripe that I have about when it comes to relationships is that most people do not question. It's just like one small example. I can do 10 examples.
I'm laughing because you're incredibly good at not only asking the question, but actually following through on it, which I think is the harder part.
To the point of being annoying, I think I'm pretty good at that.
Yeah.
So
I think I know who our next guest speaker is. We need Becca on the show for the relationship episode.
So let's take the question around having a prenuptial agreement, or like having a discussion around like how do you guys how do you manage your assets after you get married, right? Now, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not saying what has traditionally done is wrong, but you should be asking the fucking question, and you should be having a real discussion around like your true feelings around it, and come up with a solution that works for you, works for the two of you, right? And most people don't. And I know this, both from data and also anecdotally, because I've challenged my own friends to have this discussion. And the response is always like, oh, it's not romantic, whatever. But it's really, right? Like, people are not willing to lean into discomfort, right? Everyone knows that you should be asking why, but it's just like, it's just when it comes to push comes to shove, people barely do. And the sad thing, Ben, is that even in this one example, we actually know, I'm pretty sure there's data to suggest that people who do get prenups, these relationships are both happier and longer lasting, because and it's probably selection bias, because it indicates that these people are, it's not the prenup, but that people are willing to have the conversation, right? Ask the question.
I mean,
why am I signing on to?
This was on a recent Huberman podcast. Although I can't help, I hear speaking of hearing other people in your brain, I hear my dad saying to me, if a man speaks alone in the woods, is he still wrong?
No, I mean, a good point, right? But like, I mean, again, right? It's just that unwillingness to ask the question, and then coming up with variety of excuses, right? It's just like this sort of and I don't know. I think I guess.
Well, yes. So what's something that feels like a given, like a cultural, it's just obvious that you have asked why about? And
I mean, this to me is, I think, one item, right? What I just mentioned. I live in a very, very most of my friends are very liberal socially, very into personal growth, very much into, I don't know, like, and they tend to be wealthy as well, right? So, but it's the having the real conversation around, again, like, no judgment on what conclusion you come to, having a real conversation around how you divide assets when you decide to become partners with someone. It's a conversation that people are not even willing to have. And lots of other examples around, I don't know, like sexual preferences, to the nature of, like, your sexual, like, your commitment to each other, and to how to have kids, how to raise kids, when to have children. All of these are questions that you can ask and have really fascinating conversations around, and really, it's a gift to yourself and your partner, because you end up more in love, right? And so right. So ultimately, whether it's startups or health or relationships or whatever the fuck, like, you should be asking why I should do this, as opposed to going with the flow.
Well, so let me ask you this: how do you ask this? Because it sounds really simple, right? To say, well, why should we go 50-50 on our assets, or whatever the question is? But how does one create the conditions? How did you create the conditions where it was safe enough to ask the why question, and that you could engage in, an authentic exploration?
I recommend taking MDMA, and jokes aside, actually, that's a serious recommendation. Taking MDMA with your partner once in a year,
and then ask and ask these
and
questions.
diving into these hard questions is one of the best things you can do yourself. It's like incredible. It's like 10 years of therapy um bundled into, you know, one session. And for people who don't know the effects of MDMA, it's just like it makes it, it's a very heart opening experience. It takes a lot of judgment away and gives you this feeling of sort of courage and authenticity and vulnerability and feeling of connection and unbounded love. And so it just like makes it so much easier to have difficult conversations. So I did not do this, by the way. I was kind of joking. I didn't do this for this particular conversation, but that is a potential honestly serious life hack. um and so as to how to ask the question, I think actually the more important question is,
well, it's like how to set up the conditions to ask the question, right? Because the question is, well, why do we do it this way? I mean, and that part seems quite clear.
We could talk about it. I think there are many tools specific to this type of thing I have accumulated over time. You know, I'm always kind of trying to learn like how to do things better, and like, you know, there's a communication protocol called Imago. It's a, you know, for couples, and we can talk about things like that. But I think the more important point is that before even getting to the how, building the muscle of asking why all the time, right? And so the how is different sometimes from context, depending on the context and depending on the question. But the real problem is that it doesn't even occur to people, because it's easy to sleepwalk through life as opposed to ask why at all, right? And that, I think, is the true life skill, the real trick to be inquisitive about, you know, propositions that are presented to you, whether it's in your relationship or at work, or, you know, you're Elon building a rocket, or Steve Jobs building a computer, or founder starting a company, or just like, you know, doing your job day to day, even flipping burgers. I don't know, like, but just being curious about, is there a better way to do this? Am I just doing it because everyone else is doing it, or because I truly believe that this is the way to do it? Actually, you know, kind of side tangent. One of my favorite things about the Buddha and Buddhism is that there's a sutra called Kalama Sutra. Sutras are like these kind of ancient poems where Buddha's teachings are embedded and believed to be Buddha's original words. Kalama Sutra is my favorite sutra in Buddhism, and not just Buddhism, maybe one of my favorite kind of things said by any, especially a religious leader of religion type person, or any philosopher in general. And in Kalama Sutra, Buddha says, do not believe what your elders tell you. Do not believe what your teachers tell you, or your parents tell you. Do not believe what I tell you. This is quite unique. I don't remember Jesus or anyone else saying, don't believe what I tell you, or God tells you, right? The Buddha is like, do not believe what I tell you. And I forgot the exact wording, but, you know, just like ask yourself, experiment with your, you know, by yourself, and find out the truth by yourself. Believe what is true to you. Believe what you can, the truth that you can arrive at through your own reasoning. You know, and this is again, like, you know, the type of first principles thinking that we often talk about in the Silicon Valley and whatnot. It's really admirable that he preached that back in the day. Yeah. So
yeah, Buddha, the first principles thinker, and I actually really like this, because to me this was one of the things that I double clicked on as in my path as I transitioned from being an atheist into a Buddhist, that really resonated for me is that
I thought Buddhists are atheists.
Well,
but anyway, we can talk about that.
We can. Let's unpack that next. Yeah. Well, to me, it's a, you know, belief in spirituality is the idea that there is something more or greater than ourselves. But my experience with all of the great religions, most of them sort of have this notion of faith,
Yeah.
right? And I was asked as, a Jewish kid to take on faith that the Bible
Yes.
was true.
Yeah.
Right. This
Yeah.
is what happened, right, in the
Yeah.
Torah. And I just had a lot of questions about that. I'm like, why are their
Yeah.
ages off? Why is this guy living to 147 or whatever? And why do I have to take this on principle? And that's faith.
Yeah.
Versus what you're pointing to, which is trust, right? And trust is not in the Buddha or in what anyone else told you. Trust is in using the process and then having the direct experience, right? It's literally a scientific observation. And we've talked about that before. The Buddha sort of makes a hypothesis. Hey, if you do this, you will experience that. And then you do it, and then you see if you have that direct experience. And as you do, then you develop trust because you're formulating your own model of how reality is constructed based on these direct experiences.
Absolutely. And and whether it's the faith in what the Buddha said, or the faith in what California says how your assets should be divided, or faith in
again, I don't like that word faith. I think trust.
Sure, yeah. So what I'm saying is that it should not be faith-based, right? It should not be faith-based. One should question. And this is something like, if I'm to name top 2-3 things I want to impart on my children, like this, it's just like, it's a superpower, right? Like it's uncomfortable. Don't get me wrong, it is definitely uncomfortable. And it also kind of cracks open the world, the universe, like nothing else. It's the one who is able to ask why has no limitations, right? It's whether it's your body, your finances, your relationship, there's infinite possibilities on how to improve those things if you just like don't take things for granted on how it should be done. And yeah, I mean, I'm very passionate about this. I think people should be and could be and should be living godlike lives, and often what's preventing them are these mental prisons on this like sort of passed on wisdom that is preventing from constructing a better life. And yeah, so if we can change that somehow even a tiny bit, that's really a lot.
Absolutely. And to share one of my appreciations of you, it's really around this, because I am a supremely curious individual, and yet there are these major aspects of my own life that I did really take as a given, right? And so sort of until we shine our light of consciousness on it and be curious and be an inquiry, we can't shift it. And so I do really appreciate you, Dylan, for advocating for that. Now, there's some things that you have experimented with that I may never.
Hey, so some rockets are gonna blow up, man. That's just how it goes. Yeah.
But I appreciate you asking why, and may we all be freer for asking those questions.
Freer, for sure. On that note, should we go on to some of these other stories that we want to talk about?
A lot of good news.
Another huge week on AI stuff. Maybe we can bundle. We briefly mentioned Google I/O last week. They had so many super impressive releases. VO3 particularly stands out. This model that can create hyper realistic videos up to 3 minutes long, I think. Have you tried this, Ben? It's incredible.
Yeah,
it's just
amazing.
It's amazing. And also
videos with audio. That's
with audio.
That's the big shift here.
And it can generate audio that is, say, a dialogue or kind of environmental sounds, or even music, right? And there are videos of people who have generated kind of video clips of an orchestra, and it's just like everything synced perfectly, and it is just incredible. alongside this, they also released something called Synth ID, that a way of watermarking these videos so that they can be tracked across the internet, and so you wouldn't necessarily be fooled. So it's kind of like a really good thing, that companies are thinking about that type of thing too. Yeah.
Well, I want to unpack one of the big questions here, right? Because I'm down here in Santa Barbara. We're close to LA and the whole film industry and music industry and things like that. And there's a lot of fear, right, around the change that's happening. And in particular, there's this question around, will it kill creativity?
Yeah.
And I want to unpack that with you. What do you think?
So I have a lot of context on this recently, because I have been interviewing screenwriters and creatives and people who work in these animation studios and so on over the last few weeks. And the reason for this is that I at my company System 2, we're working on leaning more and more into AI when it comes to generating content in social media, promoting fitness, wellness, things like that, and for influencers, and creating even pure AI influencers, something that we're looking into. It's like a whole fascinating world, right? So yes, there is a ton of fear, and unfortunately, there's also like a lot of stigmatization going on. It's a lot of creative, especially writers, etc., taking this position. It's like, if you use AI or if you support AI at all, you're like not with us, you're against us type position. And I think it's really unfortunate, because it's really preventing people from embracing AI, and kind of really, like the few people who will embrace AI and improve their creativity will likely benefit a lot. And Google itself has partnered with this filmmaker Darren Aronofsky. I forgot how to pronounce
Darren
his last name,
Aronofsky,
but Aronofsky, who has, I believe, made some pretty. I forgot what feature film that he had made that was quite famous, but they're making a movie using DeepMind's generative models, which would be a really cool project. Ultimately, will this kill creativity? I don't know. I can't. I have a so. Let me answer the question partially. Right, it will create. It will kill sort of mass scale, like global phenomenon type creativity, and this has already happened in music, right? So some people say, I don't know, like the through 90s, up until the 90s, from maybe early 1900s or mid 1950s was like the golden era of music, because the distribution mechanisms were put in place so that the entire world could listen to and dance to the same song, right? People like, Elvis Presley to the Beatles, to the Michael Jackson songs or whatever. People who didn't even speak English. I was growing up in Sri Lanka, and I remember this moment actually. I was hanging out with some kids, and they didn't speak English, but they knew all the words to Michael Jackson songs, right? And so that's like a really cool thing. And so they hear this in the radio and they get excited about it. So that has gone away already in music, right? And the reason partially is because creating music has become so much easier, and there's a massive proliferation of music, and there's something for everyone. Now, is it a bad thing? I don't know. We do miss out on that shared experience of watching the same, listening to the same song, watching the same movie.
You're saying if you go, if you went to Sri Lanka now, the kids there wouldn't know Taylor Swift songs, for example.
They might know Taylor Swift songs, but nowhere near the way they used to know Michael Jackson songs. And even Taylor Swift is much more transient compared to a Michael Jackson, or even Britney Spears or whatever, right? And it's not because Taylor Swift is a worse artist compared to Spears, but it's almost like the paradox of choice. and there's no reason for us all to listen to the same Taylor Swift song because we can all have our own subgenre. And so this is likely to happen with AI to movie making as well, because anyone with a really clever idea, like for example, I lament all the time, why are there these $100 million+ Hollywood blockbusters, especially sci-fi movies, and the storylines are so fucking dumb, right? Like there's really barely any substance in the story, and the science is completely inaccurate, right? And the reason is that, hey, some people pay to see explosions and not accurate, hard science storylines. So but maybe in the near future, there will be many more movies that explore kind of deep philosophical ideas or hard science fiction, and it would be economical to make those movies because a small number of people like myself will still watch them, but it doesn't need to have a $100 million budget, right? So in that sense, I see a massive proliferation of creativity, if anything. Yeah, I mean, yes, that's what I think.
I mean,
short term at least.
I see a couple of parallels. My dad, who was a professional photographer growing up, and so when I was a kid, it was all film, right? And he had a studio, and he shot a lot of products and food, and sometimes he would photograph people, but people would bring in their things to the studio. We would take 3 or 4 or 5 pictures a day. There was a lot of work to make up each shot. It was a slow process. There was a dark room. I still remember how to change film, that whole thing. And so I was there when digital started to come in, and it came in a lot slower. I mean, this is like a rocket ship compared to digital coming in. And I remember my dad bought the first one of these early cameras, and it literally was a Dell laptop attached to a metal frame that had a whole thing and a bunch of sensors and a prism in the front of it. I mean, it was like this ridiculous thing. I think it was called a Foveon, and he was like one of the first people to adopt it. And most of his friends who were photographers would just laugh at this thing, right? It was so much worse than the photos that you were getting off of film. And yet he sort of stayed on the cutting edge and continued to be a photographer. And the people that didn't were gone. Right. He evolved with it, and he just believed that digital would get better and better and better, and eventually it would eliminate film. And now there's still some film, and there's a place for it, and sort of this boutique-y thing. But one of the things that the other transition that happened, which I think is relevant here, is when small digital cameras came in, and then phones and things like that. Everyone thought, oh, hey, I can just have my assistant take a picture of this, food for the magazine. And the photos just didn't turn out as good. There is something to the creativity and taste of a world-class photographer like my dad. And so his role changed, right? But it was still there. I mean, it was digital, it wasn't analog and all that sort of stuff. And I do think that there is going to continue to be a place for human taste and creativity to happen. But I think how that the creative process, that creative act, I think is going to be very different, right? I mean, you could literally spin up 100,000 versions of how a movie could play out. The plot line could actually be dynamic, right? You might not even know the whole plot as you're building the movie, right? You could sort of discover it. And so that to me was one of the interesting things here. I also will predict that there's going to be new types of content that will be created. I don't know exactly what that will be, but I don't know that we're always going to be limited to, books, movies, film in the same way that we have been. Like one possibility is that you could actually define all of the characters really clearly and how they interact. And you could have something that's more like one of those old choose your own adventure books where
absolutely
someone gets to make a choice. But maybe even the director doesn't know what's going to happen, right? Based on the choice that you have the characters make.
Yeah, I would even argue that even chatbots, and at least the way we're thinking about system two, is a new type of content, right? Like
Yeah.
creating pure AI kind of characters that live alongside you and interact with you in real world, and but then have their own storylines. That's like a whole new way of
Yeah.
it's a whole new genre of content, and that's
Yeah.
the possibilities are like endless, and the danger, or like the an undesirable version of the future here, I think in the short term at least, is that there are people who lean into these things super hard, and then there are people who like kind of like shy away from these things, and like this is
Yeah.
going to create winners and losers, right? And so yeah, so I don't know why anyone would not lean into this.
Yeah. Well, and to me, I think the amazing thing here, right, with technology is that generally there's the democratization of access to certain things, right? I mean, first version of the internet democratized access to information, which changed your life, right? And we've seen a democratization of access to other things like digital music. Now you could be a kid at home, and for a couple grand, you could build an entire symphony, right? Or you can create this digital music that you never could have done because you didn't live in the right place, you didn't know the right people, you didn't have the dollars to organize getting a live symphony together.
Oh,
Right now there's going to be a generation of kids that I don't even know if it's going to be a phone, but whatever their device is at home, they could literally build a 7-season Netflix style experience for basically free and put it out there. So to me, there's this whole creative unlock where there are going to be a set of people that had previously been disadvantaged that can now build their dreams
yeah,
and share it with the world. It's going to be super exciting.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, I'd say, yeah, I think if you're creative, you should be less worried about your job compared to a lot of other people like engineers who might lose their jobs way before that. Which I actually wanted to maybe talk about related to this. Claude also released or Anthropic released their latest model, Claude 4.0, and a huge improvement. Claude was already one of the best models for generating code, and this new model is again the very best out there for coding tasks, and it crushed benchmarks, scoring 72.5 in the most challenging software engineering benchmark, surpassing all the other previous models. And this thing is able to code for like 7 hours straight, right? And kind of like reason with itself, and build really complicated pieces of software. And it's all really cool stuff, but also kind of goes along with this is there was an article that came out in the New York Times yesterday. I think it was yesterday, and this was an exec at LinkedIn talking about some of the survey data that they're seeing internally within the company, and a large number of executives expecting especially entry level jobs to be replaced by AI. So the question that they were posing was that take software engineering, right? Like you still would like this empowers senior engineers. This empowers people who understand how to build something, understand the architecture and all that, to do something that they could not have done before by themselves. It's almost like having an entire team with you. But then what about entry level engineers? What about the Gen Z kids who are just graduating from college and wanting to get a job where they learn the basics of engineering? It's because it's potentially making it much harder for them to get a job. This is an interesting problem.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an interesting problem, and so it points back towards the creativity. I also think that the rise of vibe coding is really fascinating here. I don't know if you want to share a bit about that, or I can unpack it as I understand it.
Yeah, I mean, so vibe coding, I think Andre Karpathy from ex Tesla and OpenAI made up this term. The idea is that instead of writing code, you describe what you want to an LLM, and then the LLM generates what you described it to, using code. And the key thing here is that vibe coding, to actually get something useful out of it, you need to actually become very good at prompting the LLM, the way describing things in detail and working with it to get to something that works really well.
Yeah. Well, and to me, the thing here that I think is so fascinating, right, is having spent 2 decades working in software, building all kinds of software, including stuff that you and I built together, is that the process of going from an idea that's in an engineer's mind or product manager's mind into it is a piece of software that's been deployed, or it's an app on the phone. It's a long and expensive process. We have to imagine how it should work. We have to describe it. We work with designers. There's mocks. There's back and forth. Incredibly expensive. And then you work with engineers to actually implement it and get it right. This took many, many weeks or often months to do. And now, instead of having to do that process, you can imagine a feature or a product and the way it would work, and then just build a prototype of it and then show it to people. Because picture's worth 1,000 words. An app that actually works, maybe it's 1,000,000. And so it's over time, as Claude grows from whatever 72% on the SWE test to 100%. I mean, you'll just be able to describe how you want something to work, try it out, go through iterations. To me, there's this creative disruption to the entire software development process.
Absolutely. One thing for sure, our children, the way they would create economic value, that's going to be significantly different from how we had to do it and how generations before had to do it, right? Like, kind of like learning things from like a teacher, and how to kind of painstakingly go through the process and acquire these skills and master them and so on. The world is becoming, for better or for worse, much, much more like a playground. You can kind of like have whatever you wish at any time you want. And so I feel like in this new world, how to, what is an entry-level job, and I don't think it's defined, and there's quite a bit to figure out there. I don't think anyone has a really good answer. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
I mean, what do you think's the answer? I mean, what would you be advised if you had kids, who's a senior in high school and thinking about going to college? What would your advice be for them?
I personally, I mean, again, I have a strong bias towards entrepreneurship. I would not send my kids to college today. I would absolutely have them, again, like, you need certain resources to do these things, but I would nudge them towards creation as much as possible, and just like, and this starts with, like, it's play, right? And so just play with the tools, create something, put it out there, iterate on it. Versus, honestly, at this point of history, at the rate things are moving, man, like, going to college today is like the dumbest fucking idea ever, right? It's like you're gonna commit yourself.
You heard it here first.
Yeah, you're gonna commit yourself into some kind of like being on guardrails for 4 years is sort of a prison, honestly. While the entire world moves on with like 1,000x in compute power and intelligence, like, no, you should be like building. You should be, trying to figure it out. Like, you should be like out there, hacking and creating. I don't know. That's how I would structure my life and my kids' life. However, I completely understand that this is not a desirable option for people in many different situations. So I want to empathize with that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I would teach my kids how to surf. That, but when I say surf, though, like, sure, if they surf on water, but actually being able to surf with uncertainty through the changes. So learning how to be with that uncertainty, to be able to catch a wave and go, oh, here's where my curiosity is going, and something interesting is happening here, and let me try it. So that the curiosity, learning how to learn, and then social emotional intelligence. I mean, the only argument that I would make for college is to have if you have an environment and you need that structure and support, not everyone's as self-directed as say you
Yes.
are, or maybe I am, but to really pursue your interests, right? I mean, if
That's
I
true.
could go back right now studying philosophy, studying art, and some of these other areas that would help round me out as a human and unlock creativity, right? Along with things like group projects and learning how to play well with others. Those are the types of things that I would emphasize. But to your point, locking myself into a curriculum of like, hey, here's how to be a computer scientist,
Yeah.
when you know that the rate of innovation is so much faster than their ability to
Yeah.
even build a curriculum to teach it to you,
Yeah.
definitely wouldn't do that.
I do wonder about one thing where like what I would call AI elitism, right? It's a form of essentially intellectual elitism, but like, and it's like what I mean by that is, I wonder if it will if it widen the gap between a certain percentage of people in society and a certain other percentage of people, the people who are able to lean into AI and use it really really well. And for example, like, I mean, I don't know, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but like I have like 5 different threads with ChatGPT o3 going on, like pretty much any given time, and kind of like constantly learning. This is something that I could not have done in the past because I'm not 5 people, but now I can like have this almost like agents, like, that are part of my brain almost going off and doing work and teaching me things. And so yeah, and it's great for people who are doing it, but I wonder if it would create a gap between people who can and cannot for whatever reason. It's
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, 2 questions. The first easy one, what are your 5 threads right now?
I have to look at it, but just off the top of my head, I have a very long thread now on quantum mechanics, and most recently I'm trying to understand the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics and kind of like the math behind it a little bit. So that's one, and then another one is around health, and kind of like I uploading all my biomarkers and constantly talking about, like, how I can optimize that. And there's a thread, multiple threads around work, right? Like I have a project that I created for my company, and I've uploaded like all of my kind of documents from Notion into ChatGPT, and has full context. And then my wife's company, very similar, and a number of other ideas, around, we plan to have children, so I have a thread around that. I have a few more threads. I
Yeah.
forgot
Well,
what those
I
are,
think
but
that's a good list, and because I wanted to get to the second point, right? Because which is, I was listening to an interview with Rick Rubin, right, the famous music producer, and he wrote this book on vibe coding, right, knowing nothing about coding. And so I was listening to this interview yesterday, and one of the things that he brought up that I found fascinating, because you and I have existed in this frontier world for a long time. We've been talking about AI for well over a decade. I'm on patents for machine learning and algorithms. So I've been thinking about this, and you and I interact with it every day. But Rick made this point. He goes, when you have a tool that can do anything, it's almost hard to think about what to do just one thing with. And so there's, for all the people that we know that are at this frontier of early adoption, there's so many more people that don't even know how to engage with AI. And so there's a need to actually package it in ways that make sense to the mass population for how to use it, right?
yeah, absolutely. I wish there was actually a service. If there's anyone else listening, I've been pitching this idea to a bunch of people, like kind of early stage founders who've kind of, I've had discussions around like what to build. If there was a service that up-leveled engineering teams on how to use AI, like as a CEO, I would absolutely pay for it, and I'd pay a significant amount for it too. And there's nothing else, nothing that I've found that that kind of like that would work for this. Yeah. So, and this is, it's a specific work example, but I think it's absolutely relevant for children, for example, and everyone else as well.
Right. Yeah. Moms, dads, all the non-technical folks of just making it available to them in a format that is easy to interact with. Because you and I are just used to hacking stuff together. So, being able to speak in plain English, for us, that I said English, it just, it's just so, it feels easy relative to what we're used to, but it's a bit hard for the average person. Why don't we jump into the hack of the week? I have a hack of the week for you.
All right, let's jump into the hack of the week. What's the hack of the week this week, Ben?
So my hack of the week is actually, I used AI to read the show notes to me as we prepare, right? You prepare show notes for us for all the different topics that we're going to cover, and then I'm supposed to review those. I fell asleep with my son last night and forgot to review them. And so I'm driving to school today and I'm like, oh shit, I got to get ready. And so I just copied and pasted the show notes into ChatGPT and I said, read it to me like you would a podcast. And so that's how I prepped today. And wow, was that easy?
That's great. On that note, actually, I find Grok to be the best for conversations. I'm curious if you have a preference. But part of the reason why I prefer Grok is that you can adjust the speed and kind of I don't know, like I find ChatGPT the default speed to be kind of like boring and too slow. So with Grok you can talk to it faster, so it's kind of more interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I do find it annoying at how slow it moves. But do you find yourself wanting to do that with people, like being able to have them speak 50% faster?
Oh man, I had this professor at MIT, and he was actually, I forgot his name, but Ryan's. He was John Nash's boyfriend from The Beautiful Mind. Well, I mean, this is not like sort of publicly known as much, but it was rumored that he was John Nash's boyfriend, and he would every time he sort of tends to go on this like kind of meandering tangents while he's lecturing, and he would be short on time, and then towards the end he would be like, okay, now I'm going to speak at double speed, and we're going to get through the rest, and thus he would speak faster, which is kind of funny. I don't know. It's yeah.
Well, when
you're grateful, like
when you have all AI professors, then you'll be able to do that.
Yeah,
right? They won't be upset
all
either.
Right. On that note, we're taking a break next week, folks, and we'll be back week after with a guest who's a comedian. So that'll be really fun, and we're going to try to have more and more guests on Almost Got It, because we really enjoy it. It's really such a great time. And we'll wrap this up and give us feedback. Let us know how we can improve, and open to all suggestions. Please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. Give us some love, and talk to y'all in a couple of weeks.